We're seeing a time where Hollywood is being forced to evolve due to audience demands, new technologies, and a struggling economy. But turns out, it's already done all of that before. The transition from silent films to sound drastically altered the industry, and it happened right as the Great Depression began. Welcome back to my series on Hollywood history, where we're looking at how the industry has changed over the years, so we can better understand where it's at now. Last time we covered how Hollywood began, and how the studio system was built. Throughout the 1920s, Hollywood essentially controlled the film industry on a global scale. But the next several decades would disrupt their perfect system. In the late 20s, cinema experienced what is now called the talkie boom, which is the first couple years when silent movies transitioned to sound. The term talkie refers to the fact that audiences can now actually hear the actors talk.
Take it from me, they'll take it from you.
In 1927, Warner Brothers released The Jazz Singer as the first movie to include synchronized sound.
You ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you. You ain't heard nothing. Never fail. If you don't get a letter, then you know I'm in jail. Hey, hey.
In this era of moviegoing, the major studios owned their own movie palaces. These were similar to how Broadway theaters are to us now. They were really big and lavish. When audiences watched movies here, the show also usually included a newsreel, a short comedic film, a stage performance, and then a live orchestra that played along with the feature film. But when The Jazz Singer and later movies were able to include sound, it changed everything. The film itself was enough of an attraction that it no longer needed all of these other things to make it feel like a full show. And they definitely didn't need a live orchestra. So the studios immediately got rid of all that. They saved a lot of money, but put a lot of musicians and other performers out of work. Between 1927 and 1930, silent films completely died out in favor of talkies. And during that time, there was a major surge in movie attendance. Despite the market crash that started the Depression in October of 1929, 1930 was Hollywood's most profitable year yet. The studios were so confident that they declared themselves depression-proof. But they were about to find out they were very wrong. The conversion to sound actually created more problems than it solved. The first big problem was that even though the studios saved money by cutting orchestras and other things from their movie palaces, they really had nothing to make them more special than regular old movie houses. These smaller, independently owned theaters had all converted to sound systems by 1930 as well. So seeing a movie here, or in one of the big studio-owned theaters, wouldn't be that different anymore. The only advantage the studios had was to make the movie palaces first-run theaters, which meant that their films would play there first before being distributed to the other theaters. The other big issue was in the international market. Not only did theaters take longer to add sound systems in other countries, but they obviously wanted the film to be in their native language. For a brief period, Hollywood's solution was to film their movies in multiple languages at a time. They would film the English version during the day, and then use the same sets and costumes to film with a different cast at night in a different language. One of the famous movies that did this was 1931's Dracula.
Miss Mina, may I call later and inquire how you are feeling?
Why, yes. Thank you.
Vendré más tarde para averiguar cómo sigue usted.
The strategy was pretty expensive though, and by 1932, studios had created dubbing as the preferred method. Despite these solutions, between 1930 and 1933, Hollywood finally felt the effects of the Depression. Weekly admissions to theaters fell from 90 million to 60 million. The total industry revenue fell from 730 million to 480 million. And the number of theaters went from 23,000 to 15,300. And this decline was the worst for the Big Five, which were the five dominant studios at the time: Paramount, Fox, Warner Brothers, MGM, and RKO. The major minor studios like Columbia, Universal, and United Artists weren't hit nearly as hard, and the big difference between these groups was that the minors didn't own any theaters. As profits fell, the mortgages on those movie palaces got to be pretty costly, but the minor studios didn't have to worry about that. So what used to be a huge disadvantage suddenly became an advantage that allowed these studios to rise up with the Big Five, and they all became the Big Eight. Since most of the major studios suffered a near financial collapse, investors on Wall Street took the opportunity to get more involved in the film industry. Ownership changed hands, and these studios were now run by boards of directors who thought they could make things more financially efficient. Instead, by the end of the 1930s, even though these Wall Street groups technically owned the studios, they were still being managed by movie men out in Hollywood. But all of the studios had to adapt the type of movies they were making to remain commercially viable. And this is where we see the start of the B-movie.
You like jazz?
Not that B-movie. B-movies were designed to run as double features. Since times were tough during the Depression, this was kind of like a 2-for-1 deal. But to make sure they weren't losing money on it, the studios had to make these movies cheaply. So they were formulaic, they wouldn't have huge stars, and they'd be made as low cost as possible. But these B-movies worked. They kept the lights on so that studios could still fund some A-movies, which had all the glitz and glamour expected of Hollywood.
You go. Where shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
The 30s also saw the US government get more involved in the film industry in multiple ways. First was the National Industrial Recovery Act. To help save the movie industry, this act made certain monopoly practices legal. Things like block booking, where the studios sold groups of movies to theater owners so they would have to screen several films just to get the ones they knew their audience really wanted. Or blind bidding, where theater owners had to license the films without even seeing them. Now, if you were here for our last video, you may remember that we already talked about block booking, and that's because these practices were already happening. They were just being done under the table because they were legally questionable. This act legalized all of those practices. But at the same time, the government also wanted to make sure workers weren't exploited, so it authorized labor organizing and collective bargaining. So this is when Hollywood started to become a union town. During this time, there was also the threat of possible government censorship. Parenting and religious groups like the Catholic Legion of Decency had started protesting immorality in Hollywood due to films like the original Scarface in 1932 for having too much sexual or violent content. To prevent the government from getting involved, the film industry decided to create a system to regulate itself. The Motion Picture Producers and Distributors Association created the Production Code. At the time, the president of the association was William Hayes, so it came to be known as the Hayes Code, which was a set of rules or guidelines about what could be shown in films. At first, the code wasn't strictly enforced, but continued public pressure eventually resulted in the creation of the Production Code Administration in 1934, which had to approve all scripts before they could begin production and then had to approve the final film. The Hayes Code would last all the way until 1968 when it was replaced by an early version of the rating system we have now. Hollywood managed to survive the Great Depression and in 1939 had what some historians consider one of the best years for film ever, with movies like The Wizard of Oz, Stagecoach, Of Mice and Men, Wuthering Heights, and Gone with the Wind all coming out that year. But right as the effects of the Great Depression were wearing off and Hollywood seemed to have bounced back, the government decided it was time to start questioning Hollywood's monopoly again. In 1938, the Justice Department filed a suit on behalf of independent theater owners against the studios for monopolizing the film industry. Hollywood was yet again about to change drastically, as it faced a mounting campaign to disrupt its vertically integrated business model and as a Second World War began. We'll cover that and more in our next video on Hollywood history, so see you soon.